The world enters the atomic age by the end of World War II, with both the Americans and Russians conducting nuclear tests. Two competing nations with different political systems possess the ability to kill millions of people with the flip of one switch. American culture became increasingly conservative and developed a strong aversion to the perceived communist threat. To create a loyalty oath, the phrase "under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance to separate the U.S. from the godless communist system. In an attempt to stop communism from spreading, American society molded conformity into a tool of fear and intimidation. Pressure was put on anyone who challenged the status quo, and any sort of contradiction could lead to consequences either with your neighbors or your employment. America helped rebuild the European countries and Japan. American corporations play a large role in this innovation and manufacturing boom, creating a post-war economic recovery. This cements an overriding faith that capitalism is the only way to ensure peace and freedom. Adding to the fear over Soviet nuclear capabilities, in October 1957, the Russians successfully launched the first satellite to circle the planet. This was a complete surprise to the Americans. We had no warning, and so we did not understand what the motives were. Are the Russians spying on us from space? Was it a weapon? All that was clear was that the Soviet Union had ushered in a new era and had taken a technological leap ahead of the United States. Just 2 months later, the American rocket Vanguard burns on the launch pad, failing to launch a test satellite. This led to raw fear that we were being beaten in the space race. America's capitalist ideal of conformity became the norm, and anything looking to oppose this would be considered antisocial, dangerous, or possibly even treasonous. The Red Scare was hysteria over this perceived threat posed by the communists. It started in the late 1940s and intensified through the 1950s. It had a profound effect on U.S. government policy and a society that still operates this way today, whenever we hear politicians talk about socialism. Federal employees were analyzed to determine if they were sufficiently loyal to the government. Senator Joseph McCarthy led public investigations with the Un-American Activities Commission in Congress to track down possible communists in the government and the Hollywood film industry. This pitted people against each other: actors, screenwriters, directors, musicians, and other entertainment professionals were subsequently barred from work by the studios who used a blacklist. The hypermasculinity of World War II continues under the threat of the Cold War, with gender roles abruptly reversing any gains made during World War II. Exaggerated differences were reinforced in advertising, movie plots, plays, and all areas of popular culture. Men were supposed to focus on economic success, and women were pressured to return to the home. The images of ideal womanhood and ideal manhood would devolve into extreme stereotypes, and fashion will enforce the gender gap. This experiment, returning to pre-war or even Victorian gender norms, would not stick, leading to a rising protest by women's advocates in the 1960s and 70s. Under the pressures of the Cold War, the American landscape began to reflect the nation's fears and insecurities. This shared cultural anxiety was masked by a rigid conformity. Suburban life was a clear reflection of the themes of the 50s. An idea of what America was supposed to be could be seen in rows of suburban homes that all resembled each other. Capitalism was supported through consumerism and a conception of freedom centered on economic abundance within the traditional life. This was the ultimate representation of the American dream. In other words, we have more stuff, so we are superior. That mindset is something that the current generation is working hard to undo, as equating freedom and stuff has endangered the planet. It's worth noting the developers of the first suburb, Levittown, would not sell to people of color, creating an institutional form of racism enforced by businesses, mortgage banks, and U.S. government collusion. The ideal American life based around the new family that lived together in one home it was influenced by the media, and especially the newest media, television. Television showed the man as the wise captain of the family, and on the right-hand side we can see a TV guide showing actors from a show, Father Knows Best, and his short hair is brushed back, showing a very masculine or mature hairline. Society had supported and celebrated women's independence as self-sufficiency during World War II, as we can see in the magazine cover at left with a mother and daughter changing attire together. By the 1950s, women are portrayed in the media and advertised as helpless, childlike beings who need appliances and shopping to get through the day. Another major influence is the triumph of science. Science and technology progressed rapidly in the 1950s, perhaps faster than any singular decade before. All of these achievements were shown on shiny new TVs, bringing the world to people's living rooms. This was truly the atomic age, a period in which all the world's problems would be answered by knowledge of science. Indeed, while much good came from the scientific discoveries of the 1950s, we must remember that this was a time of great fear. Bigger and bigger bombs were being built, and the defenses against them simply did not exist yet. However, there was hope that this new source of energy could have some peaceful application. By 1954, both Russia and the U.S. had constructed nuclear power plants and were experimenting with using that power in a variety of peaceful capacities. Science fiction enters popular culture as books, films, TV shows, and comic books, which interested an entire generation in what the future might look like. The 1950s developed another popular culture style called atomic style. It is called Googie style in Los Angeles, named after Googie's restaurant, a famous early example. Other names include Populux or doo-wop style. Atomic style is an ultra-modern design that captures the fascination with atomic science during post-World War II America. It is a golden age of futurist design built on exaggerated atom shapes, merging organic shapes with mathematics, and it used dramatic angles, plastic and steel and neon, and oozed optimism about technology. The mass market version of Googie Architecture is all around us in Southern California. Serious architects and designers did not approve of this style. It was an unpretentious aesthetic meant to appeal to the average middle-class American. One of the key things about Googie Architecture was that it wasn't custom houses for the wealthy. It was coffee shops, gas stations, car washes, drive-through banks, the average building of everyday life that people used and lived in, and it brought that spirit of the modern age to their daily lives. Googie was also a realization of the future rather than simply a promise of things to come. You can see this interest in futuristic ideas not only in architecture or car design, but in cartoons like The Jetsons and Disneyland's Tomorrowland. This appeal of living in the future saturated American culture. Science greatly affects how we make fabrics, with synthetic fabrics entering the fashion world. The first two are Orlon, a wool substitute, and nylon, a synthetic silk. Anything scientific is considered modern and efficient, so this was widely adopted. Textiles and the petrochemical industry will merge to produce much more affordable drip-dry clothing. After World War II, the middle classes expanded to the largest it had ever been, and they were seen as consumers. The American consumer was praised as a patriotic citizen, contributing to the ultimate success of the American way of life. Between rising wages and cheaper manufacture, the middle classes could now afford to own as much clothing as wealthy people had in prior decades. We will see a return of specialized outfits for age groups, subcultures, and different activities. We have entered the space age, so our dog is the Russian mongrel Laika. She was found on the streets in Moscow and became the first living being to orbit the Earth. Since we are in a hyper-consumerist era, our sponsor Dogs in History has now developed a corporate logo.